This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. Hi. What do you guys want to talk about? This is such good shit. Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Well, we'll see how this one goes. I've currently got people over working on installing a new water heater. So if you hear any background noise or miscellaneous clanging going on, it's just workers disturbing the peace. And we know I very much enjoy having my peace disturbed, but that's not going to interfere with my recording schedule. Gosh darn it, ain't nobody got time for that. I'm on a time constraint myself. But I hope everyone's doing well. It is Friday, so it is another classic wrestling review installment. We're chugging our way along through this tape library for Crockett, Midsouth, and World Class. It is still amazing to think we started this project only a couple of years ago, and we're still going. A lot has changed. Most of it being for the better. I'm not necessarily speaking about the wrestling part of it. Although the addition of Midsouth to the review series has been a lot of fun. World Class is kind of its own little niche product outside everything else. You know, we've kind of been covering the steady decline of Crockett Promotions throughout the last year or so. And good God in heaven, this show. Let me tell you a thing or two about this Crockett TV episode from February 13th, 1988. Ugh. It was a rough one to sit through. And I was hoping that wasn't going to be the case. I was cautiously optimistic from out of the gate. You know, they showed the replay of Sting attacking J.J. Dillon and Raleigh after J.J. had thrown the martini in Sting's face. Get that classic J.J. bump out of the corner when he took the Stinger splash. A TV moment that will forever be etched in my memory. So, yeah, like I said, I was going into this one with high hopes. 20 seconds into the show, I was already laughing. And, well, the momentum kind of continued here as we go to the interview booth with Tony, JJ, and David. As per usual, it's Tony and JR doing all the formatting rundowns, trying to go over all the important dates and the big story angles leading into each of the events. They briefly note that Animal's health status will be updated later on in the program. And then they get to David Crockett, and his contributions pretty much amount to him saying the following statement. I say we go to the ring for action. Heck of a pitch there, David. But before we actually go to the ring, here come the Midnight Express to crash the party. I thought Sting was the party crasher on this show, but now the Midnights are stealing his gimmick. And, JC talked about a lot here. I tried to rapidly write down as much information as I possibly could. Even at half speed, I was only retaining about 33% of the material. Firstly, he mentioned that Beautiful Bobby had been screwed out of his most recent U.S. title match with Dusty Rhodes, claiming that the ref had been bought off. So even with Bobby getting the visual pin, the match was restarted, and the Midnights got screwed yet again. He also took a minute to run down a bunch of the babyface tag teams and claimed that nobody is on their level. And Now, the other thing I really got out of it was him mentioning something about Dick Murdoch being detained after a recent house show event. Apparently, they went to a local bar, and Dickie got sideways with a couple marks, and it led to him spending an entire night in jail. And you know what the funny part is? While I could definitely see this being a kayfabe story to account for why Dick wasn't on the show this week, I also could totally buy that was a legit thing that happened in real life. God, if you see the way Murdoch's been acting on these shows as of late, you wouldn't be all that surprised either. But, that was about it. There was a good chunk in the middle there where Corny kept ranting about stuff, and I was distracted watching Stan Lane struggle to reattach the Velcro to his ring jacket. Like, he undid it to try to flex his pec at some of the ladies in the crowd, but while he was trying to reattach the flap, it just kept falling off. And he tried this for like 4 straight attempts until Bobby finally saw what was going on. Then he just walked over and helped him out. Like, you could see Stan trying to keep a straight face the whole time, like, fuck. I'm on camera right now, but I need to stay in character. So that was a rather glorious train wreck moment. I also laughed when JR referred to Cornette as the man with the belly of jelly. Hope JC didn't get sideways with him about that, because that was a pretty good line. And then we pitched back to the ring for Double A versus John Savage. Double A was sporting his baby blue ring trunks for the occasion, boots included. We've not seen him in bright ring gear for a while. It was a cool color scheme, though. There was a great crowd shot moment here where Arn is just beating the crap out of Savage for like 3 minutes straight. Finally, they cut to a shot of a mother and a son in the crowd smiling. Peachy as a clam. The mom's pointing to the ring, probably saying, "Look at that evil man pounding the shit out of this poor jabroni Billy. Ain't wrestling great?" Yes, a nice family bonding moment as the heel is destroying the protagonist. Well, I can't really say that John Savage would be considered a protagonist in the literal sense, but you get what I mean. And the longer the match went, the quicker Savage kept getting blown up. Arn's just wrestling circles around the guy. And he eventually put him away with a gore buster. It is also entirely possible that Double A may have rocked Savage after giving him a DDT, because Savage was very woozy getting back to his feet. I think he might have gotten his bell rung. Arn didn't give a shit, though. Nah, he just kept that offense going, man. It is every man for himself in this sport, brother. And it actually kind of tied into his promo afterwards. JJ briefly mentioned that Tully was on a leisure, well-deserved vacation. Because after all, when you kick as much ass as the Horsemen do, well, you deserve a chance to kick back and relax every now and then. I do not dispute that. Which led Arn into talking about the fact that since the beginning of '88, Tully and Arn have had about 3 World Tag Title defenses. Not for lack of effort. Simply that they are unmatched in the current tag division. Nobody is on their level, including those 3 egomaniacs, Sting, Barry Windham, and Lex Luger. Well, as he's doing his whole spiel about how the Horsemen are the elite in the sport and like nobody is on their level, he then starts going into a conversation about capitalism, stating that to be the best at anything you do, it requires 40 to 80 to 100 hours of hard labor each week, relentless drive. But as long as the window of opportunity is open and you have that drive to succeed in life, you can achieve capitalistic greatness. And they say conservatives are the bad people. Only the establishment, folks. Only the establishment. So that was pretty great. Arn should have taught an economics class in his free time. Whenever he wasn't in the gym training, he should have been traveling the globe preaching about equal opportunity. If you want to be the best at your job, you've got to work for it. You've got to train for it. You have to live for it. Could have kicked those Gen Zers' ass a little bit and give them some honest-to-God motivation in life. Because look at those poor saps now. They used to give my generation shit for being lazy. Dear God. If you were born after the year 1996, God help you. Talk about a generation of young people doomed to fail. And most of the time, not because of their doing. So then we had Eddie Gilbert versus Dave Isley. A very technically sound match from a guy who just kind of exists on the program at the moment. I had completely forgotten about Eddie Gilbert. Ever since him and Terry Taylor split off post-Starrcade 87. That's all I have to say about it. Fine wrestling for a few minutes, and I totally forgot about it the moment it was over. Then as we come back from break, we pitch to a Magnum TA Dusty Rhodes interview, I believe at one of the local live events. They were basically standing in front of a green screen backdrop, so it definitely was not a syndicated program. But this was Dusty's opportunity to address the animal situation, and he informed Paul Jones that dues will be paid, Daddy. He says that now that Ivan Koloff and the Powers of Pain have to deal with Dusty, it's not just hockey. It's not just Paul Ellering they're going to get in the ring with. And even though Animal's down for now, justice will be coming for Paul Jones and his army very soon. And for now, Dusty's putting everybody on notice, including anybody who wants to challenge him for the U.S. strap. Names that include Bobby Eaton, Larry Zbyszko, and Baby Doll. Can you imagine? Oh, by the way, this just occurred to me. Remember that angle on TV like 2 weeks ago where Baby Doll was threatening Dusty with provocative pictures if she didn't give Larry a title shot? What happened to that? Have they even addressed that angle on TV since? I mean, I kind of want to know what spicy content Baby Doll's hiding in that manila envelope. The world wants to know. Come on, man. Can't be doing us dirty like that. Well, as we wait to see how that unfolds, we had Road Warrior Hawk in a handicap squash with Ryan Wagner and Keith Steinborn. It went exactly as you would anticipate. Hawk hit the ring, immediately barreled through both these guys with a double clothesline. Steinborn was pronounced dead on the spot. I don't believe he ever got up for the remainder of the match. He just kind of laid there. And then Hawk hit a diving doomsday clothesline on Wagner for the 3 count, which then led to the follow-up promo with Ellering and Hawk. And I mostly tuned out Ellering's dialogue. He talked about Animal's condition and said he's working every day to get back on his feet. But then Hawk does another one of his spitting, raging diatribes, essentially vowing death and destruction on Paul Jones and the Powers of Pain. Talked about the fact that they messed with the wrong set of screwed up in the head individuals. Almost a direct quote. The Legion of Doom have never cared about who they beat up and for what reason. But now they have a reason. And that sucks for the Powers of Pain. When Animal gets healthy and they find themselves standing across the ring from LOD and Dusty, it'll be payback time. Says he hopes Paul Jones has been counting his blessings because payback is fun for the Road Warriors, bad for the Army. So, yeah, Hawk means business. I did enjoy his line about the fact that the LOD have made a career out of beating up people for no reason and never giving a shit. But now that they have a reason to kill the Powers of Pain, you know it's going to suck for them. Like, as a fan, you're like, is it possible to pity the idea of Warlord and Barbarian being burnt on the stake? Because I'm kind of worried about that potential bloodbath. I would place a bet that more blood will be drawn in this upcoming six-man tag than all of the blood spilled during the Cold War. And these Hawk promos have been fantastic. You know, I talked about that last week when he cut that really good promo. And, you know, with Hawk, man, after all those silly cartoon promos we were being subjected to throughout most of 86 and 87, like to hear him just kind of come out there and be serious on the microphone for a while. Well, more serious for whatever that means for Hawk. But I have noticed it. And then we go from that to a Barry Windham promo. Talk about polar opposite personalities. And I'll be honest, I did not write a single thing down of what Barry said here. Up until the very end. Something about him going after Larry Zbyszko and trying to recapture his Western States Heritage title. But as I'm listening to him talk, I couldn't get over that hideous fucking t-shirt he had on. The hell was that thing? It was like a flesh-colored tone from the sternum up. And like the bottom quarter of the shirt was like pale gray. Like, I know Barry was a good-looking dude back in the day, but God, even he couldn't pull off this look. Like, that's the kind of shirt you wear on TV as a rib, just to see if the people make fun of you for it. I did catch his closing line where he and David were joking about his team with Luger being known as the Twin Towers. And Barry basically capped it off by going, "Me and Luger are going into our matches treating it like the Twin Towers." To which I then noted, well, the team does eventually implode on itself. Was that Barry Windham predicting the future of the country 13 years out? Oh, what a fucking fortune teller that guy turned out to be. So after hearing that line that didn't age very well, David's immediate follow-up statement is, "Let's go to the ring for jive tones." And I promptly said, "Can we maybe just have another 5 minutes of Barry Windham talking? I think that would be more enjoyable." So it's Shaska and Tiger Conway versus Gary Royal and Mike Jackson. God bless Mike Jackson for working his ass off here, but I mean, even this guy couldn't make the match entertaining. For about 4 minutes, it was merely boring. No one did anything visually off-putting, but it was far from anything remotely gratifying to watch. And then right toward the very end, I don't even know what the hell happened here. I tried going back and rewatching this to see what may have caused it. Okay, so there's a very awkward sequence between Tiger Conway and Mike Jackson where they both just kind of fall down. I think Tiger was trying to go for some kind of amateur takedown to, wrestle Jackson to the mat. But I remember thinking, Man, Jackson landed really awkwardly there. And as he's getting back to his feet, he starts grabbing at his junk while the heels are trying to give him double team moves. I'm like, did Mike accidentally ball tap himself? Did he pull his groin? I have no idea what the hell happened at the end here, but this match totally fell apart. Like, Jackson was sandbagging these guys, barely able to stand up on his own feet. Like, and you can see Jive Tones getting a little pissed off of the fact that Jackson wasn't cooperating with them. Like, finally, they just beat him with a Russian leg sweep and pin him. But the setup for it looked like a monkey trying to fuck a football. Like, Jackson just couldn't bump to save his life. He's grabbing at his nutsack. He was definitely a hurting unit after this one. And that's what happens when you're working overtime to try to get a watchable match out of Shaska Whatley and Tiger Conway Jr. in 1988. Bad times. As was this match. Oh, and they also did a promo afterwards. I have no idea what they said. I actually had to step out to take a leak. I heard Shaska yelling something about groovin' and movin'. And then I said, I need to do some moving and grooving to the toilet. Elsewise, my bladder's about to explode. So I really can't comment on that promo. Hopefully nobody tore their groin trying to deliver their lines. Then we had Lex Luger versus Alan Martin. Mostly just a hype segment for the upcoming cage match in the Omni with Luger and Ole versus Tully and Arn. I really did not note much about the match aside from Luger wins with the rack. Which I think I've made a joke about before. Like the fact that every Lex Luger match throughout his entire career up through the late 90s was, he does some stuff. Most of it gets a tepid reaction if it's not him outright flexing for the camera. But once he gives the sign for the rack, everybody goes batshit. It's a wonderful phenomenon. It's like when Orton hits the RKO from out of nowhere. People normally don't give a shit about anything else the guy does in a match. But man, when that RKO comes, people go nuts for it. But you know, it's what kept Luger on top for the remainder of the next decade. Even through all those down periods in his career throughout the mid-90s when he was getting wasted away in the WWF. But like when he came back to WCW in the late 90s and started beating everybody in TV matches on Nitro with the rack, like that guy was one of the most over dudes through like most of 95 through 97. These people love that fucking rack finish. Like, if I make it another 10 years on this channel and we get to some of the Monday Night War stuff with Nitro, I mean, you'll obviously see what I'm talking about. That footage is truly something to behold. So, well, then we went back to the booth for a follow-up Luger promo. His glistening body was here to inform us that he's not going to scream. He's not going to shout his game plan to the top of his lungs. He's already made his intentions clear about what he's going to do. He takes a minute to thank the fans for giving him a second chance. Thanks Barry Windham for giving him a second chance after he spit in his face a year ago. This is Luger's opportunity to start again and do it right this time. While he's preparing for the cage match in the Omni for the following night, he's also reflecting back on all the small things he learned as a member of the Horsemen, all those team meetings where they vowed that if one man in the group was in trouble, the entire team would be there to make the save. Mob mentality. But the cage match is different because nobody is able to help Tully and Arn. Not Flair, not JJ, nobody. And while the titles aren't on the line per se, this is about more than titles. It's about proving that the Horsemen can be beaten. And while Tully, Arn, and Flair work as a cohesive unit, Sting, Barry, and Luger can do just the same. It's an even playing field right now. For the very first time, the Horsemen are in a fair fighting predicament. And this is where they prove that the Horsemen are not unstoppable. To which my final note for the segment reads, if only Luger and Sting knew. All in all, pretty good promo, though. Another case where Luger kind of rambles on for about 15 minutes when he could easily sum the promo up in about 2. But he was learning. He was still very green, so you can't fault him. At which point, we come back from break so JJ and Flair can retort to some of Luger's commentary. JJ pretty much said that Luger stood out here moments ago and validated every single thing the Horsemen ever said about them being the measuring stick of this sport. Which was by and large true. I mean, if you really get to the grassroots breakdown of what Luger said a few minutes ago, yeah, that was pretty much his point. But then he passed the buck over to Flair so he could rip into Luger, Sting, and Barry. He called Luger a hypocrite, saying he had the balls to come out here and claim that he was ashamed to be associated with the Horsemen and live their lifestyle that he never agreed with to begin with. Meanwhile, Flair's like, well, Luger, you weren't saying that shit to your wife when you and me were parading around from hotel to hotel fucking every good-looking woman in the country. Where are your morals now, pal? I mean, I'm just kind of sitting there like, you know, if I'm Luger watching this on camera, I'm probably calling up my wife right now and telling her that everything Flair's saying is bogus. Elsewise, she might be FedExing those divorce papers to the Atlanta studios. But then he turned his attention to Sting, saying that Sting's managed to drive him crazy on TV in the last couple weeks, to the point of embarrassment. But he's not going to let some punk kid get the better of him professionally. He talked about how a lot of guys can walk around and claim to be champions, but not too many guys have that world title in front of their belt. Tully Arn and Flair are the only men that hold that title right now. And since they wrestle for the best company in the world, that makes them hands down a cut above everybody else. If God forbid the day would ever come where Sting, Luger, or Barry take the world's heavyweight title from Ric Flair, none of it would matter. Because Flair would just win it back a week later. He actually said that, by the way. I'm not kidding. He legitimately Ronnie Garvin, the top 3 babyfaces in the promotion at that moment. And let me mention a few other things here, but that was the bulk of the important material there. I'm sure Space Mountain came up, but I wasn't paying too close attention. And then we immediately go to the best segment on the entire show. The NWA Dream Match Sweepstakes infomercial. A sweepstakes that would make Tony Khan hard as a rock. I'd bet you anything he was all over this fucking thing like bees to honey. However old he was at the time. I mean, he was already fantasy booking NWA Dream Matches when he came out of the womb. This was so brilliantly 1988 in every conceivable way. The entire premise is that 200 people will be selected at random to enter the Sweepstakes Dream Card Challenge. Prizes that include, but are not limited to, a British shoe company that I've never heard of before, a bicycle company that I've also never heard of before, a VCR, talk about outdated, and a dream vacation trip to Port Royal in Port Aransas, Texas. To which some of you may be asking, where in the blue hell is Port Aransas, Texas? Fuck if I know, dude. But it apparently exists. The population would consist of anybody within close proximity of this random resort area. The rest of it's desert. Oh, and there was also the grand prize, which was a 5-day extended pay trip to New York City. And had I actually given it thought to enter the sweepstakes challenge at the time when I was a kid, as soon as I caught wind that an NYC trip was probable, I'd have said, you know what, fuck it. It's not even worth it. I'd rather take the VCR. So, yeah, this was apparently a thing in 1988. The NWA Dream Match Sweepstakes. A sweepstakes designed for the marks by the marks. God, this is on par with that ridiculous Rock and Roll Express win-a-date contest they ran in 86. Remember that? They basically had women submit requests to either date, sleep with, or travel with Ricky and Robert. And they had to set up all the age brackets to like the various contests because they didn't want to get into any legal trouble. The fuck, dude? There was so much ludicrous shit that I forgot about in wrestling during this time. I used to think this was the normal period, where everybody had their head screwed on straight. Nope. I was dead wrong. Part of me wonders if Jim Cornette remembers the NWA Dream Match Sweepstakes. Well, I can tell you what no one voted for in terms of a dream match in this promotion was Ricky Santana versus Tommy Angel, which happened to be the next match on the card. I think I fell asleep. I wrote down one sentence and it reads as follows. The show is 90 minutes, and I am currently watching a Ricky Santana showcase. The epitome of TV filler. And then after he won, he went over to the interview podium to inform everybody that he will be in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and LA to make a name for himself. And then he spoke in Spanish. This also happened on live TV. Also a thing that happened on TV, the Lightning Express versus Kurt Thompson and Max MacGyver. This is where I noted the most in-shape guy in this match was Kurt Thompson. I can neither confirm nor deny this individual was on the gas. Let's just say his upper body was extraordinarily broad. A very big man. Much like every Tim Horner-Brad Armstrong match on this program, the wrestling's fine. They're both good athletes. But kind of like earlier when I was talking about how Eddie Gilbert is just a dude on the show, that is pretty much what Horner and Armstrong are. They're a solid, underneath babyface team that they're really not doing anything with. Except to apparently tease feuds with Jive Tones and the Sheep Herders, which nobody wants to see. Speaking of the Handsome Devils, after the Lightning Express go over, the Sheep Herders hit the ring with scissors and attempt to cut Tim Horner's hair. But then they got run off by Brad Armstrong with a chair. And upon seeing this go down, kind of think back to what I talked about with Double A earlier when he was joking about the fact that he and Tully don't have any suitable competition for the World Tag Belts at the moment. And then I see them booking shit like this, and I'm reminded, duh. You wonder why Tully and Arn, the top world champions, have nobody to feud with? You have Tim Horner and Brad Armstrong wasted in go-nowhere death slot programs with the fucking Sheep Herders. Ain't nobody ever gonna get over in that. And God bless Luke and Butch, man. Like, nothing against them. In their heyday during the Memphis run, when it was Luke and Jonathan Boyd in the team, the Sheep Herders were an awesome duo. God, what year was that? Like 82? 83? It is 1988. Yeah, fucking Johnny the pervert back there waving around the New Zealand flag. He looks like he ought to be whistling Stranger in Paradise half the time. You know, Butch and Luke were already about to leave for the WWF and get made into complete cartoon parodies. More so than what they are now. Kind of starting to wonder how much of the whole tag team depletion was self-inflicted. Because, I mean, they had plenty of teams. Between the Midnights and the Horsemen, like the gap between star power of those guys versus everybody else on the roster, it's kind of sad. Sheep Herders, Lightning Express, Jive Tones, no rock and roll. Fantastics haven't shown up yet. You know, Luger and Barry were only a makeshift tag team, as was Sting and Barry. Yeah, the tag division in early 88 was terrible. And again, that's why you had guys like Stan and Bobby doing singles programs most of the time. There's just nobody in the division. Meanwhile, you got the top two heel teams making valid claims that the competition is lacking. They're kind of right. Look at the rest of the roster. You kidding? I mean, I guess we have to count the Varsity Club as a tag team. I would consider them more of a faction than an actual tag team. But, you know, Rick Steiner and Mike Rotunda were a relatively new duo at the time. Even up to this point, they weren't really solely pushing the Rotunda-Steiner team. They were still trying to get over the whole unit. And plus, Rotunda was still the TV champion, and Kevin Sullivan was kind of at the helm, calling the shots. So we had Mike Rotunda versus Rocky King. TV title match, by the way. It goes a few minutes. Rotunda does a lot of basic technical stuff, working the amateur style. He ends up going over with the double underhook suplex. Also making sure to grab a handful of tights. Because, of course, he had to. Even though he clearly had the match won, he still had to look for an excuse to hook the trunks. Good heel. And then we went over to the interview podium where we got a little bit of story development with the crew. While the Varsity Club's talking about being the most destructive group in the NWA, Sullivan starts getting into a recent conversation that came up in Greensboro. Apparently, Jimmy Garvin had called out Mike Rotunda, wanting a piece of him and the TV title, which led Sullivan into cutting the heel promo on Garvin and Precious, claiming that Garvin can't be a Varsity Club teammate because he doesn't measure up. And if there's one thing that bugs Sullivan more than anything, it's a man that lets his woman carry his balls in her purse. Ooh. He explains that the Varsity Club doesn't even like each other's company. So we can only imagine what'll happen if Garvin gets in the ring with Rotunda for a match. Oh, by the way, keep this in mind while this is all happening. Steiner and Rotunda are standing behind Sullivan getting into random shoving matches for no reason. Rotunda's yelling at people off camera, just being a total dick the whole time. It's remarkably horrible, yet so awesome. And I do have vague memories of the Varsity Club, Jimmy Garvin, Precious saga. I think it all eventually leads to them doing some kind of shark cage match down the road. But yeah, so far I'm digging the Varsity Club stuff. Kind of toes that line of serious content and comedy filler with not really going over the top with anything. But like the interplay between Rotunda and Steiner is great. Those guys work really well together. Meanwhile, Sullivan's trying to play it straight and keep everybody in line. It all works in its own strange little way. So that took us to Sting versus Bob Riddle. By the way, I'm going to try to move through the rest of this as quickly as possible because, again, the show was long. I was getting very fatigued by this point. Here's my notes. Riddle tries to do a pose down with Sting. This did not go accordingly for Mr. Riddle. Stinger splash, Scorpion, 1, 2, 3. And then Sting did a fiery babyface promo, once again calling out Ric Flair and noting that the only reason he and the Horsemen won't come out and fight him right now is that Sting has Barry and Luger to watch his back. He says he's a dangerous man, and he's got a message for the Nature Boy. His message? He's going to beat his chest, and he's going to scream, "Ow!" That was his warning message to Ric Flair. He was going to, "Ow!" in his face. Well, I'll tell you what, man, if I were Ric Flair, I'd be shaking in my boots right now. And then we had the world's most amazing six-man tag match. Here's how my notes began for this segment. It is Ivan Koloff and the Powers of Pain versus two unnamed job guys and a man they eventually identified as Randy Hogan. I believe the legitimate long-lost cousin of Hulk Hogan. He looked exactly how you would envision a Randy Hogan to look. Bleached blonde hair, bleached blonde mustache. He even had the signature bald spot to go with it. Like, I'm trying to think of an analogy here. If you took the Hulkster and left him in the dryer for too long, that was Randy Hogan. I'm not even trying to joke. I'm not being facetious at all when I say this. He legitimately ripped off Hogan's gimmick. Hook, line, and sinker. The entire look. Kind of like how Buddy Landell blatantly ripped off Flair's Nature Boy gimmick. That's what Randy Hogan did here in Crockett Promotions. He intentionally gave himself a bald spot so he could look like Hulk Hogan on purpose. The ultimate rib. Oh, and he couldn't wrestle worth the shit, which made it that much better. It is a total heel onslaught. This is the featured TV match for the week, by the way. A random six-man squash with the Powers of Pain and Ivan Koloff versus three job guys, one of whom was a flagrant Hulk Hogan parody. Can't make this shit up, man. And the longer the match went, the more the heels just kept pounding and pounding and pounding on these men, the more entertaining it became. Warlord and Barbarian in particular just mutilated these guys. Like even JR was getting visibly uncomfortable in there at one point. At the point, Barbarian nearly took one of the guys' heads off with a lariat. Guy landed right on the back of his neck and almost died. That's where JR basically said, these men are dead to rights. And they eventually put him away with the backbreaker axe handle combo. I can only hope to God this is not the last we see of Randy Hogan. He may be, in fact, my new job guy in this program. I come and go in stages, you know. For every Tony Zane and for every Lee Peak out there, there's always somebody that's just a hair worse than those guys. Randy Hogan, dude. He might be my new favorite. And this was all followed with a Paul Jones Army promo. Paul took a few minutes to plug the upcoming six-man in Philly, vowing that there will, in fact, be a title change. He also delivered a brilliant line about how the series of ladder matches for the $50,000, which they won fair and square, by the way, in that bench press contest, talks about how some people might think it's an easy task setting up a ladder and scaling the rungs to grab the money from over the ring. Wrong! And right at the point, Paul screamed, "Wrong!" and nearly died of laughter. He interrupted his own train of thought so he could interject with that word. Him saying that the Road Warriors are gun-shy now that they felt the wrath of the powers of pain. I couldn't get over that. While explaining how to properly position a ladder to climb it, he's like, "No, it's not an easy task. It's actually very challenging." And he's right. It is not easy getting gimmick ladders to cooperate in wrestling. Ask AEW about that one. I mean, after all, that's why the officials have to hold them down so the wrestlers can actually climb them properly, right? Yeah. So that was fantastic. What wasn't fantastic was the Sheepherders promo that we got after the commercial break. I wrote down one word. It epitomized almost every Sheepherders promo I think I've ever heard. Excruciating. That is all. And then for our TV main event, thank fucking Christ, it's the Garvin brothers versus a set of job guys whose names I'm not making up. Red Raider and Joe Cruz. Cruz spelled Cruze. Perhaps English was not the man's forte. Oh yeah, and JR took a minute here to inform us that the Sheepherders were a strange group of men. That is certainly descriptive. Again, at this point, I had long since checked out mentally. I was kind of hoping it would just be a Ronnie Garvin slugfest where he'd go out there and chop the shit out of some dudes for several minutes and then win with his finish. Instead, it was Ron and Jimmy working a regular boring tag match for several minutes. And then Ronnie won with the knockout punch. So it was both boring and uneventful. But hey, Precious looked good this week. At least we got that. Oh, and they also did a show closing promo. Pretty much a deal where Jimmy called out Kevin Sullivan and told him he knows that his intentions are rotten. He knows what kind of sick, twisted, and perverted man he is. And if you ever hear Sullivan or anybody in the Varsity Club mention Precious by name again, he and Ronnie are going to come out and shut them up for good. Cool. A man coming to the defense of his woman. At least we went on a high note here. But holy fuck was this show never ending. I might have had to do a final tally just to try to figure out how many goddamn segments were on this 90-minute showcase. This may have been the longest television program I've ever sat through. I mean, there had to have been, 47 segments on this show? I didn't think I was going to get through it. I didn't hate the show or anything. Compared to last week, there really wasn't a whole lot that captured my attention. No big angles. The promos were just kind of generic this week. It was just a regular, standard, run-of-the-mill Saturday on the Superstation program. But it's one of those things where instead of them boiling it down to 45 minutes, which they could have easily done, God, they tried to drag it out for 90-plus minutes. And like I said a while ago, by the time we got to hour 2, I was already over it. Obviously the big match is a 6-man tag with the Paul Jones Army versus the Road Warriors and Dusty and Philly. You also got the Omni cage match with Ole and Luger versus the Horsemen. But Yeah, that was really the big takeaway for me this week. A 45-minute show that they tried to expand and stretch out for well over an hour and a half. And it felt like it. And that wasn't the case with Midsouth. This one flew by like a wind turbine. I mean, I guess it always helps that the shows are half the length of the standard TBS program. But there's also less pointless filler. Like even the regular squashes have at least some modicum of story implication. And on the subject of stories, the big one this week was the Mid-South tag title match with DiBiase and Bourne versus Andre and Atlas. They had set that up last week after all the controversy surrounding DiBiase getting fucked around for his North American title shot for the second week in a row. And it also tied in with Bill Watts' opening commentary. You know, last week he had given word that the North American heavyweight title was vacated and was returned back to the promotion. Stagger Lee was the former champion, now gone AWOL. So on March 21st in New Orleans, there will be a one-night tournament held to crown a new North American champion. More information to come on that. And I still maintain everything I said about the design of the title last week. It was not visually impressive looking, to say the least. But as we wait to hear more information on that, we go to a pre-taped interview with Mr. Wrestling 2 from earlier in the day. He is still on the hunt for his mystery stalker, who's been leaving him threatening notes and little gimmick presents. And this week, he was left a note with half a Wrestling 2 mask tucked in the sleeve, with the note reading, "You're not half the man you say you are." To which Wrestling 2 cuts a Spitfire babyface promo, telling this mystery stalker to quit sending him messages and letters. If he is half the man he claims to be, he'll come fight Wrestling 2 face-to-face and quit hiding behind blackmail. And it was a pretty damn good fiery promo from Wrestling 2. I say it all the time. When that guy gets going, he can really show a lot of passion in his delivery, which has always been the Wrestling 2 motto. He's very laid back under normal circumstances, but give that guy an excuse to fire up and flip his lid, he won't hold back. Especially when he's got people threatening his livelihood. So this was good. Short and sweet to the point. And then we go to the ring for our opening match this week. It is Wrestling 2 versus Mike Bond. Probably the only time in my life where I looked at a job guy dwarfing a top guy, yet never thought for a split moment that the top guy was ever in jeopardy of losing the match. Mike Bond was at least a good 6'4", maybe even 6'5". I mean, Wrestling 2 barely topped 6 feet. But he's in there out wrestling and dominating Bond like it's nothing. Totally believable. And it's all relatively basic stuff until the last minute or so when Bond mistakenly goes for the mask. And just like we talked about a second ago, give Wrestling 2 a reason to be pissed off. He'll let you have it. You don't go for the mask. Cardinal rule number 1. And Mike Bond found out the hard way. So Wrestling 2 fired up on him and then put him away with a running knee lift. All playing into the story of Wrestling 2 getting more and more fed up with these cryptic notes. So he was already mad going into the match. He's had this monkey on his back for months now. He's just ready to go out there and kick some ass and plant some knees in people's faces. So we'll see what the next chapter in that story is. Then as we come back, we go to a brief overview of the North American title story. You know, we've had a couple guys throw their name into the hat for title contention, including Hacksaw Duggan. So as we go to a pre-tape with him and Reeser Bowden, Duggan's there talking about the fact that the Louisiana Heavyweight Championship is nice and all, but it's just a little too small to fit around Duggan's hefty waist. So Duggan is on the hunt for more gold, and that North American title would look really good around his waist. Of course, while Duggan's saying all this, Reeser Bowden can't help but crack a smile listening to Duggan's over-the-top commentary. He also called out Paul Bosch in Houston, saying that he wants the Brass Knucks Heavyweight Championship reinstated. Another side story that we really haven't touched on in a while, but that is still ongoing as we speak. And that segued nicely into Duggan's match with Art Cruz, which ended up being a lot more entertaining than it probably had any right to be. Cruz trying to upset Duggan with a quick one right out of the gate, going for the bridging roll-up and getting a near fall. And that temporarily stunned Duggan as Cruz tried to work him over and get some amateur takedowns on him. It's something we see a lot of during Duggan's TV matches, and especially when he was a heel, this was kind of a common thing. He wasn't selfish. He would let some of the job guys get in some offense on him, give him a few hope spots. Like, we all knew he would end up cutting them off eventually. But it was cool because, fans would actually get into his matches more frequently. Just that sliver of hope being planted that Duggan might actually get beaten by one of the underneath job guys. Now, of course, he goes over with the spear. But I think it was the way that Duggan always sold when he was in jeopardy. Like, he'd get all bug-eyed. He'd start kicking the ropes and throwing a temper tantrum, getting really antsy in his movements around the ring. And, the commentators would always mention that when Duggan was off his game and not focusing, it could potentially cost him the match if he's not careful. And I think this is how Duggan started to inadvertently get over with the Midsouth crowd after a while, just because he was so entertaining to watch, that the people kind of recognized over time that his matches were really captivating. He was a very talented worker. It's something I've noticed in the last few months, especially going back and watching a lot of Duggan's early work as a heel in Midsouth. Our next match on the card was Kelly Kiniski versus Iron Mike Sharp, which I barely jotted down any notes for. They did some back and forth big guy stuff. The crowd was eerily quiet for a lot of it. And the finish is Kiniski giving Sharp a backdrop to counter a piledriver attempt, to which Sharp immediately no-sells the bump and fires back on Kiniski with a standing lariat for the 3 count. It was about as riveting as you would anticipate a Kelly Kiniski-Mike Sharp match to be, meaning that it was a good way to put the kids to sleep. And then my eyes perked up a little bit, coming back for this next TV match. My new favorite horrible Mid-South jobber, Sonny Rogers, was in action again this week, teaming up with Tom Renesto Jr. to wrestle Buddy Landell and Joe Stark. A battle for supremacy, Boyd Pierce noted. It was a battle for something. Even Bill Watts couldn't help but take a shot at Sonny's ring gear this week, noting that if he wore something like that in the public sphere when he was growing up as a kid, they'd have checked him into a mental institution. Well, it was the South. Very important to remember that. But then again, Watts even pointed out that Boyd Pierce is known for his wacky array of color coordination schemes. To each his own. So of everybody involved in the match, Landell was clearly the best worker of the bunch. I don't think it was even close. Looked like a 10-year veteran doing sparring sessions with green developmental talent at various points. Like, Buddy's in there just wrestling circles around everybody. Renesto and Rogers are desperately trying to feed for him and keep up, which, well, you take one look at Sonny Rogers, you could probably tell why he was struggling by the end there. Cardio was probably not part of that man's daily work regimen. By far, though, my favorite part of this was the ending where all four guys are in there doing spots. Before Buddy got involved, like the other three guys are just kind of whiffing one another with these really sloppy-looking fake punches near the ropes. Finally, Buddy gets in there. He grabs a hold of Rogers before tossing him out to the floor. And Joe Stark had gotten so disoriented by this point that he randomly threw a kick, which was directed at absolutely nobody. And I rewatched the spot like over and over again to try to figure out who the hell he was even aiming at. There was nobody within arm's reach of this man when he threw this kick. Apparently, Joe was having a match with the Invisible Man. That is the only way I can make sense out of this spot. Go watch the footage if you don't believe me. It's in the last 15 seconds of the match before the spot where Rogers comes off the top rope and accidentally drives a knee into his own partner. And that spot allowed for Stark to take advantage and pin Ernesto, which was then claimed to be Joe Stark's first Mid-South victory. And boy, was he elated. Couldn't have come at a better time. After the random big boot to nobody, at least he got a victory out of it. And that brought us to our featured match for the week. For the Mid-South Tag Titles, it's the Rat Pack's Ted DiBiase and Matt Bourne versus Andre the Giant and Tony Atlas. And what a fucking match it was. This did not disappoint. There was quite a bit of stuff that went down here. Not just in this segment, but everything that followed afterwards. There was also that lingering suspicion that the Rat Pack had a game plan in mind here. They had a full week to stew on how they were going to take down this monster dream team of Andre and Atlas. For a while, things did not go in their favor, as DiBiase and Bourne are in there just bumping like pinballs for Andre. I especially laughed during DiBiase's oversell of the headbutt, where he basically did the handstand bump into the ropes. Rock used to do that when he took Austin Stunner back in the day. And while Atlas and Andre are in control of the offense, eventually the heels are able to cut off Atlas and isolate him temporarily. And it all leads to the big schmoz angle where Bourne goes to throw a punch to Atlas, but he ducks it. So Bourne accidentally knocks out Alfred Neely. And that leads to all the run-in angles with Duggan and later General Akbar and Kamala. Duggan comes down and ends up spearing Atlas, who inadvertently bumps into Andre. And while Andre's stunned in the corner trying to fight the entire Rat Pack by himself, DiBiase goes over to load up the glove, ends up catching Andre with the right hand, which Andre sells perfectly by teetering on his feet like he's about to fall over. But as the heels continue to try to get Andre off his feet, he just keeps fighting back. Finally, we get Kamala hitting the ring with a 2x4, while Andre has Bourne and DiBiase in a bear hug. And that's where Kamala gives Andre a few stiff shots with a gimmick board. Andre ends up doing a gig job, which sold the angle great. But the major spot in the whole brawl, probably one of the more memorable Mid-South angles from back around this time, Kamala giving Andre the body slam. It was easy enough to forget that Andre was body slammed plenty of times throughout his career, outside the WWF, especially well before WrestleMania 3. If you're an avid Hulk Hogan listener, I don't know why anybody would be, but I could definitely see that if you don't know your history or never saw any territory footage prior to the WWF clips around that time, you probably have no reason to doubt that Hogan was the first guy to actually body slam Andre. Especially when it's Hogan telling the story. I mean, we all know how much of a lying sack of fecal matter that clown is. So it's really cool, going back and seeing this old territory footage and recognizing that wrestling history exists outside places like the WWF. No matter how much they try to spin their corporate narrative to make you think that something is a first-time occurrence under their banner, Turns out it's not always the case. Anybody that buys the idea that Andre was never body slammed before the year 1987, well, here's your evidence to the contrary. So it's all pandemonium at that point. Everybody's going at it. Alfred Neely eventually calls for the bell as JYD and Mr. Wrestling 2 join the fight, and they thwart off the heels. And the big thing right before they cut to commercial is a very pissed off Andre shoving the babyface comrades around. You know, he already had blood pouring down his face at the time, so he was already dazed and confused after having been hit by the 2x4. So the idea is that he had no idea what was really going on. Probably assumed everybody in the ring was still a heel. So it's a very heated situation as all the babyfaces are trying to calm him down. And, well, we did come back for JYD versus Marty Lundy. At this point, Boyd had let us know that Watts left the commentary booth to go check on the status of Andre. And obviously with Dog having been involved in the previous segment, you know, he's pretty fired up himself. Going out there with a grudge. So it sucks to have been Arn Anderson in this situation. He was a victim of circumstance. But not really much to say about the match. Dog went over with a running clothesline off the ropes. Didn't even need to break out the signature thumper. He was all business tonight. And speaking of business, Andre the Giant Dude, putting the fear of God in Bill Watts himself. Ain't too many men you can claim ever accomplished that feat. But just to put a cap on all the Andre stuff for this week, Watts explains here that he has footage to show us from an interview he conducted just a few moments ago. And he informs us that for as long as he's known Andre on a personal basis, he had never seen Andre in the state of mind like he was just a second ago. And from there, we cut to a raging, off-the-cuff Andre promo, total bloody mess, saying nobody has ever done anything like that to him before. He doesn't know where Kamala comes from or what his intentions are, but he wants Kamala. He wants the general. And he wants Bill Watts to make it happen. At which point, Andre grabs Watts by the lapel. He begins shaking this man relentlessly as Watts is standing there holding the microphone, completely stone-faced. And after Andre finally lets go and begins to walk off, he goes, "You never seen me mad. Now I'm mad." And then Watts turns to look at the camera and goes, "No, nothing I can add to that." Amen, brother. Bill Watts put himself right in the fucking lion's den for this interview. What a trooper. It's also made 10 times better by, like, right before they cut away, we see Andre in the background kicking over boxes and flipping tables. And Bill Watts turns to look over his shoulder very slowly. Then he turns back to the camera and shakes his head one more time. This was such brilliant television. Rarely can I ever say there's been a point where I've seen Bill Watts visibly shaken up. Takes a real man to spoof that fucking dude. But Andre did it. From the moment he grabbed Watts and told him, "Get me Kamala," that is when Watts knew he had to deliver. For the sake of his well-being and pretty much everybody else, book that fucking match. Don't hesitate. Awesome TV segment. And then we had a quick little standby with Tim Horner and Don Bass to close out the show. It was supremely less interesting than the Andre interview with Bill Watts. It was about 3 minutes of relatively boring action, and Horner won with the Thez press. It's pretty much everything I contributed to my note-taking there. And let's be blunt, nothing was going to follow that fucking Andre face-off with Watts. Not even close. I mean, if for anything, go out of your way to watch that tag match with the Andre interview afterwards. It's definitely one of the best things I've seen Andre involved with, just from a pure emotional standpoint. And really, you didn't see Andre get pissed off all that frequently. So when he did, you knew he meant it. You knew he wasn't fooling around. And it leaves a lot of excitement surrounding what's going to happen now with the eventual clash between him and Kamala. The irresistible force, immovable object dynamic. Like, every bit of that exchange was awesome. Yeah, the rest of the show is just kind of there this week. But there's still good story development in the Wrestling 2 timeline. Yeah, Hacksaw Duggan's gaining more and more popularity each month. And a lot of the story build's been subtle in the last couple shows. But they really cemented that Devastation Inc. versus Andre feud this week. An old school classic Mid-South angle that leaves you fulfilled when the show is over. And now the banger question remains. Did World Class leave me fulfilled when the show was over? Well, at least the main event didn't involve Mike Von Erich. It's probably the highest praise I can give this one. Now, there were a couple things of interesting note this week. I think the big story was everything that happened in the first few minutes, actually. They aired a pre-tape of a recent angle they shot with Billy Haynes, Sunshine, and Rip Oliver. And as some of you may know, we've sort of been counting down the days of Billy Jack's world-class run. He showed up in December around Star Wars, and I had mentioned that he was only around for a cup of coffee before he left the territory and went to Florida for a while. So the angle they shot here involved him getting blindsided by Rip Oliver during an interview at Fort Worth. It was clearly one of those hastily thrown together scenarios where they basically took about 2 to 3 weeks worth of story content and crammed it all into about 45 seconds. We go from Rip interrupting a Billy Jack interview to about a minute later, Rip is reaching into his pocket for a gimmick and he's clocking Billy Jack over the head with it, blooding him up for the whole world to see. And this was quite the blade job for Mr. Haynes. This was not a pap smear. And this man was gushing blood all over his face. And the entire ring mat was stained in a matter of seconds. And of course, the other big thing to come out of this was Sunshine accidentally getting bumped during the interaction. She took an elbow to the head from Haynes. And, well, the whole thing resulted in Rip giving Billy Jack a series of shoulder breakers, which Bill Mercer informed us that he will be out indefinitely as he recovers from these sustained injuries. Translation: he was leaving Dallas and was never coming back. At least I don't think there was ever a blow-off to this. They may have shot a match with Rip Oliver and Billy Jack as a one-and-done blow-off before Billy left the territory, but I don't recall them ever having a match. I think this angle was purely shot as a story reason to write Haynes out of the promotion, which, I mean, at least they addressed it. They didn't just gloss over and pretend nothing ever happened. But I believe this was Billy Jack's swan song. His final moments in World Class involved him getting beaten, bloodied, and battered by Rip Oliver. All because he wanted a shot at the gold. So that brought us back to the Sportatorium for a Texas Heavyweight title match between Gino Hernandez and Tim Horner. I can't remember if we've seen Horner doing underneath matches in Dallas yet. I mean, we're currently running down a lot of his underneath matches in Mid-South from '83. Plus, you factor in all the Crockett work he's done. Yeah, we're definitely getting our weekly dose of white lightning medicine. Take that for what it's worth. Now, he had already debuted for Crockett by this point, so this is definitely doing some cross-promotional stuff. Really nothing to say about the match. Good wrestling from both guys. Gino's always good at the subtle things, especially the facial expressions. So they had Horner control a good chunk of the offense while Gino was selling and buying his time. And then right at the end, Horner goes to whip Gino into the corner, but Gino sidesteps him. Gives him a double axe off the top rope, followed by a Russian leg sweep for the 3 count. Nice, easy little showcase. Albeit I had kind of forgotten that Gino was still the Texas heavyweight champion. And the problem is you see tapes where current champions show up for matches without belts. It's impossible to track who the current champions are at a given time. Now, Gino had been carrying the Texas and the American heavyweight belts simultaneously for a period. But, remember the joke I kept making, how he would claim he was a dual champion, but we would never actually see him come out with both belts? That was the thing for like 3 months before he finally showed up with 2 belts. And I was like, oh, okay, he wasn't lying. Good to know. But yeah, nothing really to add to that. Then we came back for a Fantastics versus Rip Oliver Kelly Kiniski tag match. I should more accurately say we eventually came back for this tag match. Half the segment was spent with Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers making out with all the girls in the crowd, while the heels are just standing there with Pete in hand. Pays to be good looking. Man. It never ceases to amaze me just how white hot these people are for Fulton Rogers matches. Even for a simple little tag match against a makeshift heel pairing. These Dallas faithful are so into the Fantastics. Well, again, more accurately, the ladies are into the Fantastics. But these matches have a lot of heat. And I brought up the word simple there. That perfectly exemplifies a match like this. It's a very formulaic tag belt. Neither team was doing anything revolutionary in the realm of tag team wrestling, but they kept the pace moving. There was never any downtime, and the Fantastics stayed in control through large portions of it, so the people were into all their offense, and they were able to cut off Tommy Rogers for the heat and gave the crowd a chance to come down for a little bit before the obligatory hot tag spot. One thing I noted about Rip Oliver here, and I actually noticed this when they shot the Billy Jack angle earlier, I never took into account just how fucking strong that guy was. Like, he was powering up Billy Jack in that over-the-shoulder backbreaker position like he was nothing. And Billy Jack wasn't a small dude. But like the spots here where Oliver was throwing around and picking up Tommy Rogers like a rag doll, like that shit looked effortless. And you look at that guy for a few seconds, he doesn't look all that visually striking from a physique or muscle standpoint. But he was a strong motherfucker. But in any case, Fulton runs wild at the end. I love the deal where Rick Hazard just totally no-sold a rep bump spot. Fulton threw Kiniski into Oliver, and Hazard was kind of staying in the line of fire, totally unaware of it. And when the heels collided with him, he just sort of moved to the side and looked around like, hopefully nobody caught that on camera, because that was an obvious botch. And of course, there's all the chaos at the end where Hazard's trying to get control of both teams, but everybody just kind of hits the ring and starts doing four-way spots. So he eventually calls for the DQ. Crowd was not pleased about that, but I mean, it had gone way out of hand in the last couple minutes. Like, guys just coming in and illegally breaking up pin attempts, guys grabbing at each other's ankles and tripping them up outside the ring. Like, I think Hazard finally just said, fuck it, I'm calling it. Action was pretty good, though. Got plenty of time, people liked it. And again, for a basic, run-of-the-mill tag match with nothing at stake. The crowd was into it. And it keeps the Fantastics preoccupied while they're not currently involved with feuding with the Midnights right now. So it kind of gives us a little bit of a palate cleanser there. Good stuff. Then we came back for a brief little, whoops, we're live promo segment. And by that I mean it was pre-taped, so by all accounts, in hindsight, they could have done more than one take. I'm half-heartedly joking when I say that. But I'll go ahead and address what happened here. So Kerry is standing with Brian Diaz, welcoming him back to the Dallas territory. And it's definitely been a hot minute since we've seen Diaz in Dallas. Kerry said it's been a couple years, which I'm not doubting him. It may have been that long, as a matter of fact. But to make a long story short, as you all know, Kerry was far from what you would consider a great promo, and Diaz was not a very smooth talker himself. So there was a lot of bumbling and fumbling going on verbally here. I believe the message they tried to get out was the fact that Diaz and the Von Erichs grew up together as childhood friends, and they just wanted to welcome Diaz back to Dallas with open arms. Diaz mentions that he had been traveling all over the world, honing his craft. Now he's back in Dallas to kind of pick up where he last started. And one of his lines here, verbatim, was him saying that there's a lot of bridge under the water. I had to assume he meant that the other way around, but it was very difficult to tell. And then about midway through his dialogue, he gets interrupted by Sunshine. Her direct quote was, "I'm sorry, man." Did not expect that to come out of Sunshine's mouth. I'm sorry, man. Dude. Bro. Was she getting her scripted dialogue from Matt Riddle? Well, anyway, as she's running down the Billy Jack incident and claiming that she's going to have somebody watch her back and take out Rip Oliver for good, obviously indicating that Brian Diaz would be heavily involved in that, well, she apologizes for interrupting, to which Diaz looks at her and goes, "You can interrupt me anytime, sweetheart." And I guarantee you, if anybody else on the roster had said that to Sunshine, she'd have punted that man right in the gonads. But I guess since Diaz was a babyface, now she was okay with it. She just smiled and gave him a hug. And the very last few seconds of this consisted of everybody talking over each other and basically playing a game of whose line is it anyway. And then Sunshine said, "I'm sorry," about 100 more times before they finally cut away. A very disjointed segment. Definitely a segment designed to get you to think that it was very unplanned. But perhaps a little bit of formatting would have been good to consider. Maybe try to avoid everybody constantly talking over one another. Like, there's the scripted element to this kind of stuff where it sounds very phony. Much of WWE's promo material, for example. And then there's this kind of stuff where it's like, can we please just have one person speak at a given time? But, yes, Brian Diaz is back. So, cool, I guess. Well, he was a stable of world class going back to 82 and 83. I really did not take into account that he was gone for all that time. But the people gave him a nice ovation when he showed up here, so they obviously had not forgotten about him. But it is good. Another babyface to slot into that roster rotation. And that's so good into our TV main event of Kerry Von Erich versus Sir Christopher Adams for the American Heavyweight title. The drama between Adams and the Von Erich family continues. One of our more central focus stories on television. Now that we have the affiliation of Gary Hart as Chris's manager and the one-man gang hanging around as the muscle of the group, the end goal is for Adams to capture the NWA World's Heavyweight title, but, well, of course you got to start somewhere. The top regional belt is not a bad way to go. So the match was admittedly very dull and uneventful. The amount of sleeper holds I counted in this match were somewhere in the double digits by the end. They just really did not do a whole lot of interesting stuff here. Kerry dominated a bulk of the action. Chris tried to fight back and gain the upper hand where he could. But a lot of it was steadily in Kerry's favor, which was very interesting. The finish, however, is the big talking point of the segment, as Gary Hart helps Chris get his foot under the bottom rope to break up a pin attempt, allowing for Kerry to give chase to Gary on the floor temporarily until Chris is able to distract Bronco, helping Gary to remove his shoe and clock Kerry over the head with it. And then Adams hits Kerry with a super kick and gets the pinfall to win the American Heavyweight title with double bird flips galore. It was actually a very good camera visual. We see Gary Hart raising his fists in the air and shouting, "We did it!" Meanwhile, the Dallas faithful are standing about 10 to 15 feet behind this singular rope barricade, flipping this man off, trying to reach out to tear out his jugular. People pelting the ring with garbage immediately. It was a very funny scene. Like the stark contrast between the way the heels celebrated versus how the fans reacted. Great old school stuff. But yes, Chris is the new American Heavyweight Champion. That'll be an integral story development in the Von Erich program as we move forward. Again, though, very fascinating. Another week goes by. No sign of the one-man gang on TV. Now, you'd have thought he would have maybe been considered to factor into the finish here. But no. Chris did it. All with the help of Gary Hart. Now, sure, we'll have him show up in the coming weeks eventually. Probably as a way to steer the Von Erichs away from Chris temporarily as a distraction in the feud. But we'll see where they take it all. They also have a very interesting situation in Dallas where a lot of their top champions are currently heels, which I don't recall being a thing in recent memory. But you look at the scope of everything. Midnights are the American Tag Team Champions. Gino's the Texas Heavyweight Champion. And now you got Chris Adams as the American Heavyweight Champion. Not a lot of babyface activity at the top of the card right now as current belt holders. I'm sure a lot of that will be short term, but yeah. It's kind of an interesting dynamic to have in Dallas. Hopefully they don't situate that for a long period of time, because we all know how the Dallas faithful are. They love them some baby faces, so we wouldn't want to start a riot or anything. But yeah, that kind of rounds out Dallas for the week. Again, a very standard paint-by-numbers show, but it did the job. They moved some stories along, and that's all that matters. So as we wrap things up here, I'm still keeping the Elimination Chamber show on my radar because I know that's coming up soon. I'm going to have to pre-plan for that Monday edition. When is that show? February 24th. Okay. Yeah, so that would be next weekend. And that's a very odd start time, because where's that show? That show's in Australia, so what did I hear? Is that going to be streaming live at like 5 o'clock in the morning or something like that? Oh, good Lord. Well, the question is, am I going to wake up that early to stream it? Hell fucking nah. But, that'll be good, though, because at least I can kind of watch the show later in the day and not have to stay up until 2 in the morning. I love those international pay-per-views for that reason alone. And I haven't even been tracking what's on that card right now, but I'll stay posted because I know we'll at least do another SmackDown review beforehand. So yeah, Monday will be a normal as scheduled program, and then next weekend we'll kind of modify everything, work around that Chamber event. So more to come on that. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Take care. Peace out.